Hello, welcome to another episode of The Puzzle, where Isaac and I discuss business questions that cannot be answered in 10 minutes, but we try to at least open them up. Today, we are going to discuss a beautiful question: how to define KPIs or key performance indicators for product development and innovation. Isaac, kick us off.
I am deeply skeptical of KPIs. I think it's one of the most difficult challenges to define KPIs that will not be gamed, and it's probably impossible to define KPIs that cannot be gamed, especially when it comes to things that where you have to deal with a lot of serendipity, a lot of uncertainty. Any KPI you define must be a proxy of a proxy of a proxy. And the only sensible KPIs that you could define is something that you can maybe look at statistically, comparing over time to other projects, to other ventures, to other endeavors, and not to look at super granular KPIs where the fulfillment or not of one of those, of each of those, is subject to gaming. What I mean by that, the idea for this question came because I talked to a friend of mine who's doing international research on the investment of different countries in their R&D. And he asked me for some insights about what Greece does. Has Greece set a target for its R&D spend as percentage of the GDP? Greece being a not particularly well-known innovator globally, but still being apparently an interesting surprise over the last years. And that got us in a whole discussion where I started to ask him, like, okay, why are you looking at this kind of macroeconomic metric? You could call the KPI because the government, for example, has set a target that this will reach however much, I think 3% of the GDP by 2027 or so, or 2030 or so. And the answer was because there's no better data to do it. There's nothing better to grasp. And that, I think, already is the start of a problem, because we are looking sometimes at things that have such a huge loss factor between the target or the metric and what actually happens on the ground, that you might as well compare nonsense, like the uncertainty between so you have a system which is an economy, call it the Greek economy, the national economy, call it the company, call it the project, call it the person. And then you have inputs, time, effort, 1,000 things coming from culture, management culture, and so on. Then you have a black box in the middle, and then you measure some kind of I don't know, how many projects were done, how many projects were done on time, how much percentage of, I don't know, the GDP or the revenues came from new things in the past X years. And if you set that at the end as a KPI, how do you control for all those fuzzy, hairy things in the middle? That is on the super high level. You might have seen, I'm sure you've seen, and our listeners for sure have seen somehow over the last years, the whole discussion about story points in Agile, or they have been subjected to metrics such as, the lead time of a project in this organization is like 3 plus minus, usually plus 2 years. Why is this project slow? And they have to justify why they're slow, why they're expensive, why they're not cheap, why they're not this, why they're not that. I think everybody who has struggled in such a system knows that very often the KPI is made up. The KPI has lots of things that are not accounted for in the background. So it looks great, but it hides lots of gremlins. In the end, it's rather a control mechanism than some kind of a useful feedback, except if there's some kind of mechanism in a company, which I have not seen so far in more than 15 years in organizations, where this gets fed back to the organization to say, wait, why is our project cost going up, our lead time going down, and not only going up? So this kind of feedback doesn't exist.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what you share is echoed throughout the world, like the frustrations, the reality, etc. Metrics, measurement, indicators, KPIs, they're all close to my heart. Like I did a lot of them. I did workshops across the globe, etc. And it's really about relationships people have with these different concepts or lack of understanding. They're so omnipresent. Like everybody has heard those words, and they exist in almost every organization, that everybody thinks that they understand them. And what people often miss is, you touched upon it. So KPI is a compromise. KPI is not the ultimate truth. Like the purpose of KPI as key performance indicator is that at one moment in time, we believe that this indicator is a signal that we are coming closer to the goal, target, or whatever level of performance. That's the purpose of a KPI. If it doesn't serve that purpose, it has to be replaced. But a lot of things, they forget that the KPI is a compromise. It's not a thing that's set in stone. But let's take 2 steps back, and that is the difference between what's a measure or a metric versus an indicator. Like a distance, you can measure length in meters. That's a measure. It's not an indicator. And purpose of an indicator is to change behavior. Speedometer is a measurement device, but it's also an indicator when I combine it with the speeding limits. So it tells me the speed, I see the speeding limit, together I adjust my behavior. I will either accelerate or decelerate. The same thing is in organization. You will see a lot of things that are actually just measurements, but spoken as if they're indicators. For example, a cumulative number of page visits. What's that? That's not an indicator. What you're gonna do? It just goes one direction, doesn't tell you anything about change. It doesn't actually even tell you anything about popularity, because if you're not seeing time ratios, etc., it's useless. So kind of just a little bit of effort to understand these important differences between different elements and understanding the role of indicators, especially KPIs, I found to be very helpful to the conversation. Because as you said, everything can be gamed. The gaming part happens when there's a punishment or reward attached to an indicator. That's when the gaming begins. So if you're stuck to an indicator instead of a target or end goal outcome, the gaming begins. The only way to circumvent gaming is 1, by understanding the purpose, and 2, by focusing on have we reached the destination. If we haven't reached the destination, but KPIs were all green, that means we selected the wrong KPIs, right? So there should be no punishment, there should be no reward, because the end target hasn't been achieved. But as you say, this association happens, especially in the larger organization, because everything gets so much broken down that somebody ends up with the KPI of boxes moved from left to right. And it's not their fault. Somebody pushed it upon them, and they actually don't have the power to fight back or to redefine their indicators. So of course they move boxes from left to right. They might not even know if that helps the business or doesn't help the business.
And if you combine that with a micromanager who will focus on getting that performance out of the people, they will be happy to shift boxes left and right, regardless of whatever it is that they're working towards, if they're working towards something, just to not even to hit some target, just to get the micromanager off their backs. This I've actually seen. That's totally stupid. Like when I see that, I become annoyed with the amount of frustration and waste of human time and potential this causes, let alone the fact that it results in nothing of value getting produced in the end. But you asked about something. I want to address something that you said, which I find is actually the root cause of the situation, is that my gut feeling about KPIs, KPIs, not metrics. Ignore metrics, I agree, and it's a great point. We measure a lot, and we like to geek about data a lot, especially those of us who are more technically inclined, or those who believe that technocratically you measure things and somehow you see things in the data and big data and all that stuff. We measure a lot. Most of it is garbage because it's not measured in a scientific way. It's not measured to capture the system error and so on. So forget about data gathering. It's already problematic in terms of seriousness in which it's gathered. But the problem I see is that, first of all, KPIs, if you're going to have a KPI, don't have a KPI. Have more. And don't treat any of those as the one KPI to hit. Look at the constellation of KPIs that hopefully all of them, they somehow highlight a different aspect of the system or a different trade-off, ideally a trade-off, as you said, a compromise that the system has inherently. But the problem is that I have is that those people, I don't care about KPIs, but people who like to focus on metrics or KPIs in best case. What do they try to do? They try to tame a very complex system. Take, for example, sales, revenues. Some people like to take all kinds of metrics or KPIs in best case and somehow combine them to make the target mix that you have to hit this and we have to be above this and below that and so on. Hoping to somehow sketch the system that they try to control. And yes, okay, people talk about VUCA and volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Assuming that this is true and that complexity grows, what exactly are you trying to control? Yes, you have some aspects of the system are under your influence. I wouldn't even call it under your control. But in my mind's eye, whenever somebody talks about setting targets based on KPIs and all that, I imagine a balloon. Imagine a balloon in your hand that is not inflated to its 100%. Take this balloon in your hand and squeeze it. It will come out between your fingers. Then take your finger and push one part in. It will come out somewhere else. You try to squeeze the balloon, to constrain it, to somehow tame it, master it. And there will always be some other way that it will escape from you. Now, clutch it harder. At some point, the balloon will not pop, but it will escape one side. You're trying to constrain something that has so many unintended consequences and so many interactions and so many degrees of freedom, if you want, to use technical parlance, that you are not going to make it. But as long as we are talking in this pseudoscientific world of KPIs and measuring and reporting and all that, we are in this world where we pretend that we have a chance to take something which is insanely complex, so many interactions, and somehow, miraculously, we're so great, maybe because we did an MBA, or maybe because we read a Harvard Business Review article, or maybe because our boss is busting us, our boss about fixing things and hitting targets and so on, that we say, yes, okay, fine, I'll set some KPIs. Then you set your KPIs, then what do you do with that? What did you achieve? Maybe a bit controversial. You achieve as much as the Soviets achieved in eradicating famine in the Soviet Union. Yeah, they had, they had some food to eat here, but their people were starving. This month, they hit their KPI, but their people are starving. You're trying to control something, which fundamentally, I'm not saying it's hopeless, but you're trying to control maybe too much. And maybe it's better to start with subsystems that you can hope to somehow grasp with KPIs. And then see if it makes sense to look at the whole system. But the farther away you go from things that can be influenced and not gained, my experience has been the more you talk about nonsense. And there are plenty of people who work super hard. They have roles and titles and reporting and all that, who are getting paid to report on that nonsense. And dashboards, BI, Power BI and all that. It is sad, honestly. I don't like thinking of this. That's why also I'm not doing that kind of work. And I always hate it. But to each their own, I guess.
But as I said, because unfortunately your experience isn't unique, and that's at least why I focus on kind of drawing attention that KPIs are a compromise. They're just means to an end, not the other way around. If we position them as an ends in themselves, that's when we run in all the trouble. Positioning them as means doesn't magically solve the issue, but at least it helps us move in the right direction. So kind of to create those signals to get ahead, to achieve what we want. And just looking at the time, another broken 10 minutes, but at least good discussion. I will just end with one recommendation and then wrap up. So we did ask how to define KPIs for product development and innovation, and we actually went more philosophically about measures. And my recommendation is still in that direction. One of the best books I've read on that was Hubbard's How to Measure Anything.
Yes.
Right. So he really focused on understanding, assessments, assumptions, thinking, setting up your own measures, turning them into indicators. It's a great book. It will really help. If you haven't read it, I warmly suggest it. Isaak read it as well, obviously likes it too. It's a great start. it's better start than going and copying existing KPIs, because the one will learn you how to fish, the other is just to fish.
I agree. It's a great book. And one thing, I'm reminded of someone who left their Big Four consultancy. I saw a post on LinkedIn, and he was so proud to publish a list of KPIs that he had been gathering for years and years from all of the projects that he did. What is the point? What I don't get the point. You just slap metrics and KPIs on everything you want. It's like, yes, I did it. We need to escape that mindset.
For that person, it's marketing, but for people in businesses, I would say it's dangerous.
Yes.
Stay away from such lists. If you want to turn something in KPI, that will impact the behavior of people in the organization, and that can have negative ramifications. So you must understand, anything you want to turn it into KPI, it's your responsibility to understand, to really, really understand what happens if it goes up, what happens if it goes down, what actually makes it go up, what actually makes it go down.
Absolutely.
And these are sometimes very difficult questions to answer, which you, Isaac, you touched upon, how it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's nonsense. I would still say, for some things, it's worth it trying to make sense as much as you can. So I would be in that camp. But it's very, very easy to go into, Kabuki theater.
Yeah, not too big, not too small. I think that's where there's a sweet spot. You have to find it out for your organizational situation to define something that helps you move forward, and not something that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in either direction. That we agree on. I'm not saying KPIs are useless, but the way they're being implemented are typically useless and just a Kabuki theater, as you called it.
Yeah. Okay. Dear listeners, thank you for listening. If you have a difficult business question you would like to suggest, you know where to find us. Just send it. We're gonna politely discuss the question for at least 10 minutes and open up new pieces of the puzzle. Until next time.
Goodbye.